Hello and welcome to Wendell's Guide to Glyphs in patch 5.3 for hunters. So pretty much I'm just going to go through every single glyph we have and actually try to at least show you every glyph so that you can get a little bit better idea than my last video of what they all do. So here we go. Alright, so first off, before we get started, there's Tome of the Clear Mine. If you don't know what that is, basically that's something you can purchase off of various tundra mammoths or other mammoth or whatever. It's pretty easy to find a vendor or whatever that sells these items, but when you're max level, you use Tome of Clear Mine. I think at lower levels, you use Dust of Disappearance, Vanishing Powder. But basically, you use these items to actually clear your glyphs. So you could, if you have them in your inventory, you can right-click on the glyph, and you're able to clear them out. And then from there, as long as you purchased your glyph, there will be like a list over here which shows all the glyphs, and if it's grayed out, that means you haven't purchased and learned it. But if you've learned all your glyphs, then you can just keep doing it once you've learned them. So you can see, like, all I have to do is click on this, and then click the glyph I want, and then click wherever it is. The other thing you gotta be aware of is you have 3 primary glyphs at max level, and then 3 minor glyphs at max level. The primary glyphs usually sometimes they'll offer DPS increase. More often than not, it's more of something for PvP purposes or utility purpose. Minor glyphs generally don't do hardly anything. There's a couple that might be a tiny bit useful, but for the most part they're either just fun glyphs or they just don't really do much of anything. They're just cosmetic purposes. So alright, so the first glyph we have is called Glyph of Aim Shot. That's specific to the marksman tree. So if you are a marksman spec, then that glyph will be useful to you. If you're not even marksman spec, then there's 0 pointing in that glyph. Basically what it does is it allows you to cast aim shot while you move. Normally, if I were to cast aim shot like here and I move, you can see it gets interrupted. If you have it the glyph, however, then you can cast aim shot, and if you have to move, you can keep casting, so it doesn't interrupt your cast, which that is very good both for PvE and PvP purposes. Alright, for this next glyph is Glyph of Animal Bond, and what that does is while your pet is active, you and your pet receive 10% additional healing. So you can see I'm getting healed for 6208 here without the glyph. If I put the glyph on and then recast renew, I'm now getting healed from 6208 to 6830. So that's about a 600 heal difference off a hot. And keep in mind, normal healers will be healing you for vastly larger numbers. So 10% more of those vastly larger numbers is going to be a lot more. So pretty much this is a very, very good glyph to have in PvE situations, as it increases the amount of heals you receive, which means your healers are able to heal other people instead of you. So pretty much mandatory in PvE situations. PvP could be useful if you have a healer partner, but other than that, you're probably going to use other glyphs in PvP situations, most likely. Alright, the next glyph we have is Glyph of Black Ice, which allows your ice trap to actually increase your own movement speed by 50%, while also slowing the target's movement speed by 50%. This makes it pretty useful in PvP situations so that you can kite melee around, and you'll actually be able to kite them and increase your own movement speed while they slow their movement speed. So, like so. They'll still probably be able to hit you, but the amount that they hit you is going to be a lot less. You can see how he's like, arr! So if you do some proper kiting, you can actually like kite around. It makes it so that it's a pretty useful tool as far as kiting purposes go, especially in PvP. So, alright, so this next glyph is Glyph of Camouflage. And basically what that does is, normally when you camo, if you remain in place, it puts a buff on you that says stealth, but if you start moving, like so, you can see that you can actually see the person. Plus, you're running at normal speed, and you can run with speed increasements and all that stuff. But essentially you're still visible to an extent. So with Glyph of Camouflage, what that does is once you use it, it activates the stealth permanently, but you'll move at 50% reduced speed. So you can see here that I've now got Glyph of Camo on, and I'm currently moving around, but you can see that I'm no longer able to see my character as he's moving around. You can actually see him slightly right there in front of me now, but his nameplate's not even popping up. So that's actually something interesting. So apparently with this glyph, your nameplate won't even pop up in PvP combat while you're stealthed. So you can see that, and the only reason I can even see me is when I go in front of myself. If I go directly behind myself, I actually disappear. Also keep in mind that while you're in a PvP situation, if you have your pet out while your combat pet becomes stealth, your non-combat pet, you can see my little panda, is still unstealth, so that can actually be very bad in PvP situations, because that means they can actually track you based on where your little non-combat pet is. So make sure if you're in a PvP situation, you do not have any of your non-combat pets out if you're going to be stealth, because they can follow you based on that. The next glyph we have is called Glyph of Chimera Shot, and basically what that allows you to do is it heals you for 5%. It goes from healing you from 5% of your total health, which in my case would be about 25,900 something, to 7% of your total health, which apparently is about 35,000 in my case. So you can see without it, I don't have it up, I get healed for 25,680. That's what it was. So I'll heal myself for 25,680 every time with my current health, how much stamina I have in my current health and everything. However, with it, I'll go from 25,680 to 35,900. So you can see I get healed for almost 10,000 more health with that glyph, which definitely adds up over time. Keep in mind that it's possible for these heals to also actually crit, which means it's possible you could actually get healed for a larger percent. I don't see it crit very often, but it is possible for it to crit, so just keep that in mind. So that makes this glyph useful both in PvE situations where you're probably not going to get a lot of heals, especially for extreme soloing, and in PvP situations as well. This next glyph is Glyph of Deterrence, and what that does is it reduces damage reduction you take by 20%. So, say you're in a PvP situation and someone throws dots on you, like so. You can see this dot's ticking for about 1300 a tick. If I were to deterrence it, it goes from 1300 to 965. So, and now it goes back to 1800 or 1300 or whatever. So, normally deterrence it'll go from that to 900, 1300 to 900 or so. However, if I were to glyph it, then it'll further reduce that damage, like so. So you can see I'm taking 1300 deterrence. I'm now taking 689 as opposed to the 900 I would have taken normally. And then once it runs out, I go back to taking 1300, or crits in that case. Couple crits right there. Yeah. So that can be very useful in PvP situations where you're having a lot of dots on you, since it won't, when you activate deterrence, it'll prevent damage from going on you, but it won't prevent, it won't remove dots, but it will pretty much make those dots go from taking, like, doing 30% damage to, or 70% damage rather, to doing 50% damage while deterrence is active. In addition, it can also be useful in a few PvE situations where, for whatever reason, an effect will basically, like, you can't actually deflect it. So there's a few PvE situations where I believe one of them is on Heroic Elgon. Like, if you have to soak this one thing on Heroic Elgon, then it basically makes it so that rather than taking like 400k or whatever it is, you take 200k. So it's just useful in a few situations as far as that goes. So this next glyph is called Glyph of Disengage, and basically what it does is it almost doubles the length of how far you go. Prior patches I didn't find it very useful because I had never actually used it, but because of how far it actually disengages you in PvE and PvP situations, I actually find it fairly useful. So you can see I'm here at the blue marker. I'm like la-di-da. From here, without the disengage, I'll be able to go to about the green marker. However, if I were to glyph it, I'm able to go all the way back to the purple marker. So it adds about, I guess it's about a third, maybe a third of probably like 30% extra distance. It may not look like a lot right here, but it actually does help a lot being able to disengage back that much farther rather than just up to here. So it can be very useful both in PvP situations and PvE situations for getting around. Just be aware that there are situations where you definitely don't want to have it, because otherwise you may end up having to be very, very careful about where you disengage, and because you may end, like on say Durumu, you may end up actually disengaging off of the edge otherwise. Unless you're like pretty close to Durumu himself. So, but it's a very useful tool I have found. So, alright, for the next glyph we have Glyph of Distracting Shot. Normally how Distracting Shot works is, say your pet's attacking the mob or whatever, if you Distracting Shot, normally the target's going to try and come and attack you while it's distracted, and then once it's done being distracted, it'll go back to attacking whoever it was attacking. However, if you were to glyph it, how it would work is you could actually get a target to go from attacking you to attacking your pet. Like so. So I sit there and say he's either attacking me or he's attacking someone else. In this case, he's attacking me. Now that I have distraction shot glyphed, I can go shoot him, and he'll go from attacking me to attacking my pet, which I don't know what that was. But so you can see, every time I use distraction shot, he's going to go and try to attack my pet. This can be useful kind of like as a way of doing ping pong, where like he'll go and attack your pet, he'll go after you, then he'll go after your pet, then he'll go after you. So you can see, like, right now he's going after me, then I ping pong him back to my pet. So this can be very useful for ping ponging him back to your pet. Keep in mind, if for whatever reason you want to be able to make sure that it is able to attack you, then you don't want to have this glyphed. Honestly, I can't really think of an actual situation where it would be useful, but the only thing it definitely wouldn't be useful in PvP situations. But in PvE situations, it might be useful. But I can't really think of a good situation, in all honesty. So, yeah. Alright, so basically this next glyph, what it does is it makes it so your pet will not die. It fits under the effects of Bestial Wrath. But if it takes any damage after Bestial Wrath, it'll die, because you can see it's 13, 14, 12, 9. I'm going to go ahead and pop BM. So you can see he's at 1% health, 1% health, 1% health. So he's not dying right now, but as soon as it ends, boom, he dies. So it's a very sketchy glyph to use because of that. It pretty much means if your pet's Bestial Wrath will last however long Bestial Wrath lasts, 8 seconds, whatever, but outside of that, like as soon as it ends, since your pet still takes damage, your pet's pretty much going to die. So I don't like that glyph simply because it means your pet's reached a point where it's going to die, which as BM, which is the only way you can use that ability, your pet's pretty much dead, and that's a huge DPS loss. And it'll take like 4 seconds or whatever to res your pet, so it can be a useful glyph, sort of, if your pet's going to die, maybe in PvP situations, but in all honesty, if your pet's going to die, then you need to do something to keep your pet alive rather than keeping it alive for like a second or a few seconds extra. So, alright, so this next glyph is called Glyph of Explosive Trap, and what this does is, normally when you throw an explosive trap, it deals ticking damage to any enemies within the cone, or the radius of explosive trap. So you can see it takes ticking damage, blah blah blah, which probably isn't a lot. What the glyph, however, does is it stops enemies from actually taking damage, and instead what it does is it'll actually cause enemies to be knocked back. This can be especially useful if, say, you're on the edge of a cliff, like this guy right here, and it actually allows you to knock them off the cliff. He's like, I just got knocked off. I find it's not going to be useful in PvE situations. Not that I can think of, anyways. But it can actually be very, very useful in PvP situations, especially depending on either the there's certain battlegrounds, like say Arathi Basin. If you're up on the lumber mill, you can actually go ahead and basically do what shamans, I think it's shamans, either shamans or druids, but you can do what they do, where you can actually like place this right there, and you knock them off, and then that causes them to pretty much usually die by being knocked off the edge. I think Eye of the Storm is another useful place, like around the flag or something. You can go ahead and do that. Pretty much like anywhere where there's like a sort of like a cliff-like area. So this can be a very useful tool in certain battlegrounds, and even without battlegrounds, it can be a useful tool just for like knocking enemies back. Just be aware you need to make sure that you put it on the opposite side of where they are in relation to the cliff, so that when it explodes, it knocks them back from the explosive trap. So you need to if you put it on the side of them that is closer to the cliff as opposed to the side of them that's farther away from the cliff, they'll be knocked away from the edge rather than towards the edge, and thus prevent them from falling off. So like if I were to place it here as opposed to the other side, they'd be knocked safely over there instead of being knocked off the cliff. So pretty fun glyph to have, and can be pretty damn useful, so especially in PvP. So alright, so basically the next glyph we have is Glyph of Freezing Trap. What that does is, normally when you break the target's broken out of the trap, they just run at you like normal unless you apply some sort of other speed movement thing on them. Glyph of Freezing Trap, however, will pretty much slow them down by 70% for 4 seconds. So you can see here, I shoot him, blah blah blah, and then I shoot him again, he breaks out, and now he's got super slow movement for 4 seconds, and then he runs back after me again. I don't think it's that useful. It's not going to be useful in PvE probably, but in PvP it can be situationally useful, especially if, like, say you're in an arena, you trap a healer, and then you basically drag the other DPS to the other side of the arena. That basically gives you an extra 4 seconds once the healer breaks out, that they're going to be super slowed. So that extra 4 seconds could be the difference between killing the DPS before the healer reaches them or not. So it's kind of a situational glyph for PvP normally. Alright, so this next glyph is called Glyph of Ice Trap, and basically what it does is increases the radius of Ice Trap by 2 yards. So you can see right here, this is just what a normal Ice Trap would look like. I've kind of outlined using little markers the borders. If I were to glyph it, however, it would go from that to that. So in all honesty, it doesn't really look like it even increases it that much. Like you can see right there, I guess that goes like to there, from there to there. I mean, it really doesn't look like it increases it hardly anything. The only thing that I could really find a use for this, honestly, is maybe if you were to use this in conjunction with the black ice, it'll give you a little bit larger area to actually run around in as you're kiting. But other than that, I don't see it being that useful. However, if you want to, you can go ahead and throw it on just to have that little bit of tiny extra radius for PvP purposes if you need to kite. So that is what that is. This next glyph is called Glyph of Liberation, and basically what this does is every time you disengage away from a target, you get healed for 5%. So if you disengage every 15 seconds, or 25 seconds if you don't have it, the talent, then every either 15 or 25 seconds you'll be able to heal for 5% of your total health. So you can see I go, ah! I just got healed for 25k. So in essence, it's like having a second Chimera shot. And I like to have it for both PvE and PvP situations, because in both cases I find, especially in PvP, you're disengaging it a lot, and PvE it helps it if you know you're going to get healed. It is an added incentive to actually like kind of move around using disengage, which will help your healers out. So I find it actually to be an extremely beneficial glyph for both PvE and PvP situations. Definitely awesome to be able to heal 5% every time you disengage away. Just keep in mind that you do actually need to disengage in order to get the heal. So if you're in a fight where you're probably not going to be disengaging a whole lot, it's probably not going to be all that useful. Alright, so this next glyph basically increases Master's Call from 4 seconds to 8 seconds. So PvE, not really that useful. PvP, though, that actually could be pretty useful in that it basically makes it so that you're immune, you and your pet are immune to roots, slows, and all that type of stuff, and it'll remove it as well. So 8 seconds in PvP can actually be quite a long time, even though it seems short. So that can be a very useful glyph to have. Like so. Let's see. Void tendrils. Oh no, I'm stunned. Oh look, I'm no longer stunned with Master's Call. And I can't be stunned for another 4 seconds. 3, 2, 1. So that can be a very useful glyph to have in PvP. This next glyph is called Glyph of Menpet, not to be confused with Glyph of Mending. What it does is it has a 50% chance on every tick to clean, basically dispel one curse, disease, and magic or poison effect from your pet each tick. In all honesty, I do not think I know of a single fight where this would be useful. In PvE situations, you're really not going to probably be using it in PvP anyways, so in all honesty, like it just doesn't seem like it'd be very viable in PvP. PvE situations, which is probably where it would be more in, because of how your pet avoids most damage anyways, there's not a lot of situations that I've encountered. In fact, in all of my extreme soloing, I don't think I've encountered a single situation where that glyph would actually make that big of a difference. Like almost all the stuff your pet's able to avoid anyways, so in all honesty, that's a pretty useless glyph. I don't think I've seen the use for it yet. So this next glyph, Glyph of Mending, basically what that does is it allows you to heal your pet for an additional 60% per tick of Menpet. So you can see right now I heal my pet for about 17,976, 17,900, 17,900. If I were to glyph it, I would go from 17,900 to 28,700. So that's a little over 10,000 increase per healing tick of Menpet. Keep in mind, for extreme soloing purposes, a lot of times you have a tanking pet along with other glyphs and talents and everything, and so those also help increase healing as well, which means you're going to be healing your pet for a lot, um, like a lot more than that with that glyph. So that is an extremely useful glyph for extreme soloing. Outside of extreme soloing, you're probably not going to use it a whole lot in PvP situations. A lot of the other glyphs are actually pretty good for PvP, so you're probably going to use those over this one. PvE situation, the only actual raiding situation I can think of is Dark Animus, if you're having your pet tank one of the ads. That's pretty much a must-have glyph for that fight, so very, very good glyph to have. So that could be an extremely useful glyph if you use it properly. This next glyph of Mirrored Blades, basically makes it so that whenever you get attacked by a spell, you actually have a 100% chance to reflect that spell back to the attacker. So normally what happens is if you get attacked, you'll just deflect it. So in this case, if my little priest over here attacks me with a spell, say I deterrence and then he attacks me, you can see I just deflect it. However, if I glyph it, where is it? If I glyph it and he attacks me with his little Shadow Word Pain spell, which let me pop it. Boop. And boop. You can see he's actually now applied Shadow Word Pain to himself. PvE situations, there's not a whole lot of PvE situations I really know about. I'd have to do some research, but for the most part, you're probably not going to use that a whole lot in PvE situations. But yeah, so you're probably not going to use it a whole lot in PvE situations. PvP, it can actually, depending on who you're fighting in PvP, obviously they'd have to be a caster. It can be situationally good. Essentially, while you have the turns up, say they pop all their cooldowns and start attacking you, you pop the turrets, bam, all those attacks go and back onto them, and then so they've just damaged themselves a ton. And then as soon as you get out of deterrence, then you can just finish them off. So it's a situational PvP spell, but it's actually an extremely, really good one, I think. So yeah. This next spell, Glyph of Misdirection, basically what that does is it resets the cooldown on Misdirection if you have it, if you use it on your pet. So every time you use it on your pet, it'll get reset as soon as the 3 seconds are up, rather than waiting the full duration, 20-30 seconds, whatever. So, normally if I were to just do this, I could be like, okay, I've misdirected you, blah, blah, blah. You can see I've got the 3 seconds, blah, blah, and now I've got to wait the 20 seconds or whatever it is for my misdirection to come back off cooldown. However, should I glyph it? Doing. I can glyph it, and then I can basically chain misdirects back to back to back. So in this case, I can go, okay, I misdirected you, blah, 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 I'm attacking, blah, 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 and then I can misdirect again, blah, 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 I'm attacking, blah, 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 blah. And I can just keep doing that back to back to back as long as I'm misdirecting my pet with this glyph. It's not going to be useful at all in PvP. PvE, there may be situations in PvE it's useful for, but I can't really think of too many. Mainly what it's useful for, though, is extreme hunter soloing. And what it's useful for there is basically so you can chain Mr. X back to back onto your pet and prevent yourself from gaining threat while you're doing your extreme soloing, so that any new ads that spawn will go onto your pet, any damage you deal will go on to your pet as opposed to you. So definitely very, very useful. In fact, pretty much mandatory if you're doing extreme soloing. Outside of that, probably won't use it a whole lot. Or if you're just soloing in particular, you can also have it then. Alright, so this next glyph, Glyph of No Escape, increases the range crit strike of all your attacks on targets that are affected by your freezing trap by 20%. That pretty much makes it almost completely and utterly useless as a glyph, because there's far better glyphs out there. If it actually had a lasting effect where like it would increase it by 20% for like a duration, then it'd be maybe more useful. But as it stands now, basically how it works is when you freeze a target, that essentially you're only going to have like one hit that's going to actually be able to attack and get a crit. So essentially, one hit has a 20. One of your attacks has 20% increased hit. So that makes it almost completely useless, in my opinion. So yeah, you might be able to, if you glyph it, maybe in PvE or something, you might be able to, like, at the start of a pull, get an extra 20% chance to get a crit on someone you trap. But other than that, like, it's just probably not worth it. So the next glyph we have is Glyph of Pathfinding, which basically increases the speed of aspect of this pack by 8%, and other your normal speed by an extra 10%, which doesn't stack with other effects. So you can go slightly faster, but I don't even think it actually stacks with. I'm not sure if it stacks with the guild one or not, but essentially, I guess it would put you on par with maybe like paladins and death knights with their increased movement speed while mounted. So, in all honesty, probably not really that useful. It probably should be more of a minor glyph than a major glyph. So, this next glyph, basically what this next glyph does is Glyph of Scattershot increases the range of Scattershot by 3 yards. So you go from 20 yards to 23 yards. So you can see right now, basically from where I'm standing to where a harem is standing, is the normal range of Scattershot, max range. If I were to go 23 yards, it would be right there instead. So you can see I glyph it, and now I can scatter them from slightly farther back. Be like, hey look, I scattered you, yay! So, maybe slightly useful in PvP situations, but in all honesty, like, that extra 3 yards probably won't make that big a difference. So, I personally think there's better glyphs, but if that extra 3 yards means anything to you, then I guess you could have that. So, that's pretty much how that works. So, this next glyph is called Glyph of Snake Trap, pretty much, and what it does is it reduces the area of effect damage snakes take by 90%. Normally, you won't use it in PvE situations, but if you use it in a PvP situation, a lot of times what happens is the whoever activates it or whatever, when they get the snakes on them, will use some sort of AoE effect, like say Thunderclap in this case, which will deal usually it'll pretty much, based on their gear, it'll pretty much kill all the snakes in one, possibly two AoEs. So essentially, it's very easy to counter snake traps. As a result, it is kind of sucks. So what this glyph does is it allows you to basically negate their counter to your snake trap. So you can see right now I activate it. And I'm like, oh no, there's snakes on me. So you can see I just did about probably like half the damage to that snake right there. And then I killed that snake. A lot of the other snakes are actually pretty close to dying as well. And that's like from two things. Normally, you're going to have someone a lot more geared than like 400 gear level or whatever. So they're pretty much just going to one-shot your snakes. However, if I glyph it like so, and then throw down a snake trap, da-da-da. When I run over the snake trap this time, and they're killing me, you can see he's at 98% after a single thunderclap. Now I did it to him again, he went down to like 74, and actually most of the damage he's taking is from dots rather than the actual thunderclap itself, because thunderclap applies like bleed effects. So pretty much Glyph of snake trap will counter their counter to your snake trap. So that can be, it's situational, but I think that can be actually fairly decent in PvP situations. So this next glyph is also PvP based, usually, and it could be PvE actually, depending on what you're doing. But basically what this next one does is your freezing trap and your scatter trap will remove all dot effects from the target. That basically makes it so that whenever you scatter trap now, and whenever you use your freezing trap, if there's any dots on the target, you'll no longer have to worry about the dots breaking the scatter trap or or a scatter shot or breaking the freezing trap. So normally, if I were to say dot him like so, and then I did that, the dot actually removed the scatter shot prematurely. I think there was like a second or two left. It's a lot harder to actually see as far as on actual things, but say I were to trap him, if I throw a dot on him and then try to trap him, you can see it's going to tick, which removes the freezing trap prematurely, or the freezing trap. What this glyph does is this glyph will actually be, I'd say it's situational, but it's very good in PvP. Less so in PvE, because people should be really watching their dots anyways in PvE, but, well, you may have to use it in PvE depending on the situation. So you can see if I were to dot them up now and then scatter them, it would remove the dot. If I were to dot them up now and then throw the trap on them, it removes the dot, which means basically I no longer have to worry. With that glyph, I can now scatter and trap a target without having to worry about dots breaking them out prematurely. So this can be extremely useful in PvE, or not, rather PvP situations, like an arena or whatever, where you can like trap a target and it'll remove all the dots from them, so you can keep them trapped rather than having them immediately break out of your trap. Alright, so this next glyph is called Glyph of Trank Shot, and what this does is it basically adds a 10-second cooldown to your Trank Shot, but your Trank Shot no longer costs 20 focus. It's really not that useful. I'd say it's probably not that good in PvP. Unless you're just never using Trank Shot and you're just like, well, I might as well get a free Trank Shot. But in all honesty, in PvP situations, you're going to probably be doing a lot of tranking, or you're going to at least want the option to do a lot of tranking. So, probably not that useful in PvP. PvE situations, however, it'll probably be really good because you're not going to do a lot of tranking in PvE, so you'll be able to do a trank shot without having to worry about your focus. So that could be very good for depending on the situation in PvP. So you can see here, like there's a bunch of stuff on this guy I can trank shot off. I can like trank. So that's 3 things I was able to trank off of him. Which means he now has to actually recast all these various abilities on himself. You can be like, ah. So like I'm like trank. So you can see like as a disc priest, there's a lot of stuff I gotta be able to trank, which in order to get it all off. And in PvP, you're gonna just have so much stuff to trank off that's like ah. So you're probably not gonna want that in PvP. But if you're doing just PvP or PvE rather, where it's just one thing to trank, then you can be like usually in a rage. Then you can just be like trank, and you're like, yay, I'm done. That didn't cost me any focus, hooray! So it can be pretty useful for that. Alright, so this next glyph is called Glyph of Aspect of the Beast, and it's actually fairly decent as far as being useful in PvP. So the fact it's a minor glyph is kind of nice. Basically what it does though is it allows you to have an extra glyph, which you do have to activate. So you can see normally you have 3 glyphs: Aspect of the Hawk, Cheetah, Pack, and it gives you a third or a fourth one rather, which allows you to basically become a beast. So if someone say has the ability to track humanoids, then they will no longer be able to track you unless they turn on track beast. So they'll have to you'll basically become a beast, and they'll have to be able to track you by a track beast instead of track humanoid. So basically for druids have an ability where they're able to do something called track humanoid. They can also glyph it so it'll also track beast as well, but I don't have that glyph on me. So normally you can see I've got my track humanoid, so you can see I can see Wenll over here, my main character. I can see him on my map. However, when I switch to track beast glyph, you can see he disappeared from my map, and when I take it off, he reappears. When I put it back on, he disappears. So for tracking purposes, usually probably in battlegrounds more than arena, I would guess, it can be kind of useful. So there's a useful minor glyph. So the next glyph we have is Glyph Aspect of the Cheetah. What that does is basically whenever you have Aspect of the Cheetah up, if you get hit, it will basically negate the effect of Aspect of the Cheetah, and it'll cancel the aura along with preventing you from using any of your other aspects for about 4 seconds. So this is honestly another very useful one, I believe, as well, because while it will prevent you from using switching back to Aspect of the Hawk for 4 seconds, you can use it in PvP and PvE situations without getting dazed. Like, you could still get the chance of being dazed normally through a normal daze, but you won't get that 100% chance of being dazed just by having Aspects of Cheetah on. So like normally I'll be like la 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 la. So like if I were to be hit by a druid over here, I'd be like, ah, I'm being dazed, being dazed, being dazed. However, if I were to glyph it and then use it, you can see that even though I got hit, what happened was I was automatically taken out of aspects of the cheetah, and so you can see I just automatically get taken out of aspects of the cheetah whenever I get hit instead of being dazed. So that is actually a very, very useful one. I'd probably recommend actually having that on at all times because of that. So the next glyph we've got is Aspect of the Pack, which basically increases the range of Aspect of the Pack by 15 yards. So, not really that useful in PvP. In fact, you don't want to use it in PvP because you'll end up dazing people in PvP. So, don't want to have that in PvP. PvE, you could put it in PvE. Just make sure when you use Aspects of the Pack in PvE that you turn it off. It's more of a if you're running back type of situation, so that you can increase the range of Aspect of the Pack, increase the range of people who get affected by it. So you can see like way out here. But yeah, all it really does is just increase the range of Aspect of the Pack, those who get affected by it. So not that big a deal for Glyph, but I guess if you want it for run backs when you wipe in a raid or something. This next one's pretty much more of my cosmetic Glyph. Basically what it does is every time you use a aspect, it'll summon a little mini critter or whatever that represents that aspect. So like so. So like I do this, a little hawk comes out for Aspect of the Hawk. Cheetah, a little mini orange tabby cat comes out. Aspect of the Pack, silver tabby cat comes out. And Aspect of the Beast, a Cornish Rex cat comes out. So just more of a cosmetic thing, not really that big a deal. So this next minor glyph, basically Glyph of Direction. What that does is whenever you misdirect to your target, so in this case Woofy, your target becomes larger. So it's pretty much just purely cosmetic. So you can see, watch this. I misdirect to my Woofy, and while that is currently on him, he will be larger. And then as soon as I've used that, he'll go back to being smaller. But while he is misdirected, he will appear larger. So purely cosmetic. Unfortunately, after 5.2 or after 5.3, they removed the glitch where you can no longer chain MDs using that glyph. So very sad. So this next glyph is called Glyph of Fetch, and basically what it does is it commands your pet to loot a target up to 40 feet or 40 yards away. So basically where you can find it is if you go into your spell book and go to the general tab, it'll be listed probably like third option down, and it's listed as Fetch. So you can just drag it down, or you can click it, whatever, and apparently it has a cast time too. But you just click on the target way over there, and you click Fetch, and your pet will go wee, and then it'll come back, and the loot table will be up, and you can be like, okay, I want to loot this, or I don't want to loot that. So I don't really know how it's a very useful ability, because it'd be more useful if mobs didn't aggro onto your pet, but because mobs can aggro onto your pet, it's probably not all that useful. You can see blah blah. So, but there it is, a semi-fun ability, I guess. I don't know. This next glyph is called Glyph of Fireworks, and basically what this allows you to do is it gives you a new ability called Fireworks. It's listed under the General tab as well, so you can just like have it there. And then what it does is you can activate it, and it looks like you're gonna shoot your arrow. So you can be like, ah, and it has a cast time and everything. But then what it does is it actually shoots a firework into the sky. So you can like have a mob targeted, and you can do that, and it'll just shoot a little firework into the sky. So purely cosmetic, won't aggro anything. Just be careful if you do have something targeted, not to actually attack it if you don't want to attack it. So, but it can be kind of fun. I like to have it. So, this next glyph is called Glyph of Lesser Proportion, and basically it just slightly reduces the size of your pet. So you can see my pet's about yay size right now. I put that on, and I honestly actually can't. Okay, I think it shrunk a tiny bit. So probably one of the least useful glyphs I have ever seen. This next glyph of marking, basically it replaces your hunter mark. So you can see right how here on your hunter mark it puts this little mark over the guy's head. What Glyph of Marking does is instead of putting that on his head, it'll put a bullseye on his head. So you can see it has like a bullseye effect instead of a little pointy arrow. So that's pretty much just a purely cosmetic change, not really that big a deal at all. So this next glyph is Glyph of Revive Pet, and that can be useful. Unfortunately, it basically makes it so that whenever you're trying to cast Revive Pet on a pet, you can see like right now if I were to get hit, if he can't hit me, normally if you get hit and everything, it can cause pushback. Like you see right there, it causes pushback. So if you're getting hit by like multiple mobs or other mobs or whatever, it can cause pushback for when you're trying to revive your pet, like right there, which I guess isn't really too big a deal, but every second counts when you're in a raid or something. Especially in a raid where you're taking lots of damage, you're probably going to have lots of pushback. But basically what Revive Pet does is it makes it so that you don't receive any pushback at all. So you can cast Revive Pet without suffering any sort of pushback while you're casting it. So you can be like, yay, I cast it without wasting too much time. Unfortunately, you're still wasting time during a fight, but if you lose your pet, but every second counts, so it shouldn't be as big a DPS loss, hopefully. So this next Glyph of Stampede, is basically what it does is it no longer summons pets from your stable, where normally when you do Glyph of Stampede, you'll have your pet out, and then you'll do Glyph of Stampede, which apparently it's not letting me do. There we go. So that would do Glyph of Stampede, and it would summon all my other pets, which would attack the target from my stable. You can see my wolf's out there, my raptor's out there, my hyena, my turtle, all of them, and then my cat's over here with me because I didn't tell it to attack. But yeah, normally that's what it looks like, is it'll summon all those pets. So what Glyph of Stampede does is it pretty much makes it so that whatever your current pet you have out, that's the pet that's going to be replicated another 4 times, and you're going to have like 4 more of those pets out. So in this case, with my turtle, if I were to do Glyph of Stampede, I would have 4 more turtle pets out. If I were to have a Spirit Beast out, then I'd have 4 more Spirit Beasts out. If I had a Core Hound, 4 more Core Hounds would come out, and so on and so forth. This can be really, honestly, this is actually a bad thing because it looks cool. Like if I were to do it right here, Stampede, you now have a whole bunch of turtles, and they're all like, "Wee, we've got a bunch of turtles." You have like 4 turtles, which they're all on top of each other, so you can't really tell the difference. But you've got like basically 5 turtles out now. The reason this is bad is in most situations you do not want this to happen, because if you set up a good stable and you're in a situation where you're either alone or in a situation where like you don't have very many buffs or debuffs, by having a good stable, then at least for the time while you have your stable out, you'll actually receive all the various buffs and debuffs of all those pets. If you have Glyph of Stampede, what's going to happen is you're only going to have that one pet, and you're going to have it 4 times over, which means you're no longer going to have all the different buffs and debuffs, which means having Glyph of Stampede is actually a DPS loss. The only way Glyph of Stampede is not a DPS loss is if you already have the buffs and debuffs. So, in all honesty, the only place where it's actually useful is in a PvP situation where you have Spirit Beasts. And if you have Spirit Beasts, then because Spirit Beasts have an auto heal ability, the Spirit Beast will basically allow you to... that was kind of cool. But the Spirit Beast will basically, like, you'll have a whole bunch of Spirit Beasts healing you instead of just one Spirit Beast. But if that's the case, you could honestly just bring along 5 Spirit Beasts, unless you're unable to find 5 Spirit Beasts, to do that as well. So, unless you desperately need that healing for PvP purposes, in all honesty, it's a very large DPS loss to use Glyph of Stampede. So, that is that. Alright, so this final glyph is Glyph of Tame Beast, and what this does is it lowers the cast time of Tame Beast from 8 seconds to 4 seconds, which unless you're going around doing a bunch of Tame Beasts or whatever, usually you're not going to be just running around taming beasts, so not really that big of a glyph to have. But if for whatever reason you decide, hey, I want to go tame a beast, then this is a very good glyph to have. So you can see right now, 8 seconds, blah 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 blah, goes down, goes down, goes down. And so basically it's 8 seconds to do. If I were to have the glyph, however, be like la, and apparently oh, there it is. If I were to have the glyph, I could just as easily do, and now it's 4 seconds instead of the 8. Keep in mind though, if you are taming, you're probably going to actually want to do a trap or something. And if you do a trap, you will trap the target while it runs over to you, and you'll have more than plenty of time to tame it. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So yeah, alright, so I guess to end this, pretty much kind of quick review. PvP purposes, a lot of the glyphs are more for PvP purposes and utility purposes than PvE. If you're doing extreme soloing, Chimera Shot and Liberation are useful depending on what spec you are and everything and what you're doing. Glyph of Mending, Glyph of Misdirection, definitely mandatory if you're doing extreme soloing. If you're just in a raid or something, Animal Bond, definitely mandatory. Glyph of Aim Shot, pretty useful if you're in a marksman spec, which unfortunately marksman's kind of down this patch, so yeah, probably won't be, but you never know. Glyph of Deterrence can be useful in PvE situations. Glyph of Disengage can be useful in PvE situations. Glyph of Liberation is pretty useful in PvE situations. In fact, I almost always have that one in addition to Animal Bond. And pretty much really the only ones I swap out is I'll do swap out Deterrence and Disengage with each other, depending on the fight. Minor Glyphs, Aspect of the Cheetah can be fairly useful. I usually never even bother activating it, but you never know. You might want to activate Aspect of the Cheetah, and that'll prevent you from getting dazed. Revive Pet would be another useful one, and other than that, just whatever. So, anyways, hope you found this guide helpful, and thanks for watching.